Thank you. I'll call the special board meeting of October 23rd, 2024. I'll call the meeting to order at 7:11. We have a pretty simple agenda tonight, but we'll start out with the roll call.
Director Bloom.
Here.
Director Jones.
Aye.
Director Bernstein.
Present.
Director Corrali. Present. And Director Solano.
Here. Okay, so all board members are here along with the chief and some of his staff. Reportable actions from closed session. We had no reportable actions from the closed session meeting that we just had. And so our regular agenda today is simply discuss and provide feedback regarding the strategic plan. And I think we are ready to jump in and into the chief.
Could I ask a question just about the purpose of the meeting? I guess I have a point of view, so let me say the point of view right up front. It seems to me that strategic planning is the purview of the board. And so somehow the words that we provide input doesn't seem appropriate for me. Input to who? I think we are, planning is what we're supposed to be doing. And I'm just suggesting that in the past, when we've done this, we have created a strategic plan, or we how should I say, laid the groundwork for a strategic plan. And it feels to me like it's being removed from the board's purview. We're a stakeholder like other stakeholders, but I don't believe that's the case. I believe we are the strategic planning unit for the fire district. So that's just my comment.
Okay.
I can launch it and even address to a degree some of Director Bernstein's concerns. So ultimately the board, when the strategic plan is finalized, it will come to the board for approval and adoption. You know, a good portion of the strategic planning that's been occurring over the last, and it's kind of all blended together, 2 days. A good amount of it is operationally centric. There are things that are, as I'm sure Dan will share with you, they're kind of a little bit trying to figure out where we want to be, you know, or what we want to do and accomplish over the next 5 years. And it, you know, from my perspective, it should be a collaborative effort between outside stakeholders, internal stakeholders, and the board should really have input and a say in it. Ultimately, the final authority to approve and adopt is going to be at the pleasure of our fire board here. So I will, rather than talk too much, I'm going to let Dan Johnson introduce himself and give you a little insight into what we're going to be doing tonight. And we're wide open for all kinds of input.
Well, I'll speak to what we were asked to do and the process that we run. For me, I work for AP Triton. I'm a retired fire chief. And I worked as a fire chief in Oregon and in Utah. Worked in a city, worked for a fire district, and then worked for a fire authority. My last role was I served as the fire chief in Unified Fire Authority in Salt Lake, where I worked for 17 mayors, working to help all of the communities kind of go in a good direction that worked for each of them individually. Prior to that, it was a district more like you with a direct elect board, right? So what we were asked to do and what we focused on is to try and bring you the kind of overview the process that gets to a point where you get to operate at the policy level and the financial fiduciary needs that you need to operate on, not only during the plan process, but annually, to make sure that you determine the pace and the priorities of the fire district globally. But what staff is going to bring to you is a tool that's listening to the community, listening to the labor group, the firefighters, the prevention staff, and tries to bring to you a document that hopefully moves the organization in the best way for the community. I've always looked at the partnership between the organization and the board as a partnership between what the organization thinks is best for the community, but validated by what you know is best for the community as the elected official. Does that make sense in this process? And Sometimes plans are done strictly by staff, sometimes they're done just by board, there's no right or wrong way. We've simply been asked to do it in a way that fits in here. Our process that we follow is, we start with asking the organization to upload a lot of information and data that's already in existence, demographics, all of that information that comes in, financial data. We ask them to form a team, a cross-section of the organization that allows for people to become educated about the big picture, and then allow for the dialogue over several days to identify where that fits. Believing that it takes the entire organization and the board to build a good, effective strategic plan, not one or the other, but both, all together. We created some documents that gave an environmental scan that helped everybody from the labor group to the prevention staff, to the firefighters working at a station, to understand basically what are the finances like, what's the facilities look like, what is the policy, what's the practices, what's the emergency incident performance, what did the community say in their survey, which we had about 149 responses to share their viewpoints and thoughts. And then we took all those surveys, all that information, and we spent the last few days, particularly the first day, trying to identify what they saw globally as the strengths, the weaknesses, the opportunities, and the challenges. Today, we worked a lot on trying to identify what might be some good initiatives to take care of. I'm also a believer that the plan has to be pretty simple. Things are working in the organization and on path. They don't need to be part of a strategic plan. A strategic plan is more about what areas are there gaps in the service, the performance, the quality of the organization that need to maybe be addressed, that by the end of the plan are working more effectively. So they're identifying some of those things, they're creating outcome statements, and they've created a few initiatives to make those things fit. They focused in on primarily the global piece of this. Everything that has to be done, it has to be fiscally sustainable and be done responsibly, and they recognize that, and that's been an overarching piece of that. They talked a little bit about an initiative related to service to the community that talks about the levels and the performance. So to understand where that fits, they talked a little bit about a leadership initiative that hits on competencies, on development, on succession planning as areas that they feel like they could do a little bit better for the community on. They talked about workforce demographics. And in that area, that's the hiring process, being more reflective of the community that's being served. Those are areas that they feel have gaps that they've created a few action items to try and work on. They talked about organizational culture and the need to potentially be more inclusive, bit of a mission-driven culture itself that allows for less policy-driven and more do the right thing at the right moment in time. They talked about their appraisal system. They talked about methods for recognition. Those are the areas where they're in today, and those are getting refined. And like the chief mentioned, a packet will be eventually presented to you for consideration and further discussion. But before we close out our discussion online, you're way more than a stakeholder. You need to share some of your goals and expectations. Right, so what we want to capture from you is to share, what things do you want to make sure are part of in this plan? And what do you see from a board level as the strengths and weaknesses? We're prepared to capture some of those. And
start anytime.
So maybe we start with, what do you want to make sure this plan, or is this method that we use in line with what you hope to have happen for the district's plan?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, I just will give him a chance to make sure he was done with his
Thank you.
preamble. I think any one of us could have interrupted 20 times, so go ahead.
No, I was just waiting to jump in and, I think I can speak for myself that my purpose sitting on this board is to keep the community we serve safe, and their goals are to be operationally sound and to provide those services to our community. And the thing that I really want to find out, because I want to support the mission that the chief and his staff and of course the organization is the goals and objectives that they've identified. And not only, affective, which is state of mind, but cognitive too, the actual measures, what's done. Is it a 3 to 5 year plan, 10-year plan? How far out are we going? And as I said, I feel my purpose is to support the organization and the community. So with that, tell me, I already have seen the fire agency the way it is. And, as far as I'm concerned, it's a top-notch agency. I mean, you dial 911, someone shows up, they save lives and property. But, I'm in a position where, I want to see what they want so I can support their mission and goals. So, thank you, Gary.
And that'll be fairly well defined, and you can make sure that what their actions are keeping the community safe.
What is the time horizon on that?
On what you would see, we'll actually have a draft plan for the chief within a week.
No, I don't mean that, I mean, as
Oh,
far
it's
as.
5 years, it's a
5
target for 5 years,
Yeah, okay,
sorry.
perfect. I'm gonna have all the work done, and I'll come back to myself.
Well, it's a loaded question.
Hard questions a little bit.
Yeah, very loaded. My mind raised when it comes to, understanding if there is anything new, and sometimes you don't have to build a new mousetrap, you just gotta refine and perfect what you got. And I think there are areas within the structure that need to be defined. I think I've talked to everyone on the board about it, it's no secret. But I think in terms of being able to try, because we went through this process a couple of years ago. You guys may have been a part of that process, so I'm not sure. But I think whatever, from my perspective as a board member, is a reflection of what the community that I come from, and the community that overall really wants to see, more responsiveness from the fire district in terms of go from emergency, go from looking at right now our firefighters give good service, excellent service to the community. But there are areas in which there probably could be more communication, I should say. And that's more from the board, from those people that are interfacing with the community, more visibility, more conversation needs to take place, and how to achieve that. Because sometimes certain things can be, it doesn't take much. But I think understanding what each community that the board represent really needs and wants out of the leadership and board and fire chief for them. So that's would be my hope, is to try to explore that.
Good. They have a piece that's focused on that. It'll be good to make sure that's clear in the expectations on both community engagement and involvement and inclusive of all communities served by the district. We, for instance, in the community meeting, didn't get a significant broad representation in the discussion, which becomes a gap in the ability to understand what the community is looking for. So it becomes part of the plan to enhance that, either whether it's approachability or whether it's information delivered or however that communication hits as a discussion.
And I think it taking the show on the road. You know what I mean? Sometimes, like tonight, I skipped a meeting about the San Diego County College District. They was having that first time that I grew up, and I've been in the community 40 years, ever come and want to talk to the community. But, I have an obligation here, so I came here. Frequency or more often than not.
Understood, factor that too.
What kind of people did show up at the meeting? Right, you said they weren't representative, who?
We had, I think if you lead off some of the people, you had people from Atherton, you had people from Menlo Park, various different, groups. There was nobody representing
East
East
Palo Alto,
Palo Alto.
Melvin had some issues, so we didn't have a representative from the city of East Palo Alto. Though Melvin's getting some ways where he can give us some feedback since he wasn't able to be there in person. We had quite a bit of,
Melvin?
Melvin Gaines is the
City
city
manager.
manager, sorry. We had quite a few members of our CERT groups that were there in attendance. We had, one person was representing a developer, one person was there on behalf of the Four Seasons. Trying to remember who else was there. Fran, Fran, who is our Chamber of Commerce person, was there. Another gentleman, I'm forgetting what his connection was, but
How were they chosen or invited?
Yeah, I was just gonna ask.
I have to get back. I don't know. Do you know, Dan?
Yeah.
Oh, Dan can answer.
Yeah, we really try to achieve a representative cross-section. I don't know if we missed the mark or if it was just a conflict of schedules, but we tried to hit people from all of the communities, certainly East Palo Alto, Bellhaven. We invited folks from the North Fair Oaks Center, Family Center. We invited all the water companies. We invited a lot of our business folks, the Chamber of Commerce, which is now county.
So you had an invitation list that it was trying to be
We were targeting,
representative community you serve.
yeah, Chief Peterson's guidance was shoot for about 20 to 25 to keep it manageable, so we sent out, I think, about 40 invitations. A lot of folks replied, and then we're at the last minute unable to show up, but as Chief mentioned, we're trying to give them access to still provide some input, but.
And related to that, you mentioned a survey with 149 responses.
Yeah, both from people who've had exposure to the district, either in emergency response or through fire prevention or through an interest in the district.
So how many surveys were sent out to get the 149?
So that was a solicitation with a QR code. We sent a mailer to every address that we've responded to, this calendar year. We called out the skilled nursing facilities and the schools. We hand delivered to the schools and a lot of the convalescent hospitals. I personally delivered, a handful to Menlo Atherton High School's principal, 16 Coleman Place, 1275 Crane Management, the VA hospital. It's a little difficult to find somebody at the VA hospital because there's so many different entities that are on that property. We also did a social media outreach with a QR code for the community to provide feedback. I believe, as Chief Peterson said, I think we had about 149 people reply.
So mostly focused on people that we've had interaction with our services in the last year.
Yes, Melissa explained at the beginning of the meeting, there was, the vast majority were people we had contact with, residents. There are a few people that work here, in the community but live elsewhere, and there are a few people that just visit here periodically.
Yeah.
But you asked the number too, and I think you sent out somewhere in the neighborhood of 2,500 cards for the response, 1,000 and related to the prevention, and then all your social medias, and you still got, and it was a
Less
pretty,
than 150.
150 responses, and
I mean,
that,
that can be good and bad, right?
you're right, it could mean that people are pretty
Are
happy, they don't
happy.
have much to say, but we also consciously on the community survey, keep it fairly short and sweet and simple. Or it doesn't get.
Could we have a list of the list of the sampling and the survey questions? Do we have a copy?
I don't have it with me, but.
No, I mean,
Yeah.
I
I can get you a list of all the people that received personal invites. We also did a separate invitation for partners, so our law enforcement agencies,
Okay.
neighborhood fire districts. I think we sent out about 20 of those and we had 5 responses.
Do any board members have other process questions? Otherwise, we'll go on to Virginia. Any other process? Okay, go ahead, Virginia.
So I agree with what everyone else is saying in terms of community engagement. I think there are two things. I mean, my overall overarching, and I think the reason that people elected me is to make sure that we have the resources to keep our entire and very diverse fire district safe, right? And timely response, well-trained, personnel, great financial health, strong admin to keep things going, and, even people like the FEMA team, right? And they really think people are very proud of that. So that's, to me, like the external facing issues that we, we hear about and what we should be taking care of, in my mind, at a minimum. The other things that, so I think that community engagement is really important, especially like with this last deployment. I heard from some friends in East Palo Alto who were very proud that our guys are being deployed, and to go, how can I get more engaged, and that kind of thing. So that is really good. I think that even though you may not have a lot of people at these pop-ups with John Johnston pop-up with the fire marshal, I think people do appreciate that we're in the community, right? So I think that's getting so much better, and our board is in a place now where, we can do these things. So that's the external facing. The internal facing for me is the stuff like the dispatch, ambulance, the ALS, JPA, that the public may not know about or kind of take for granted that 911 is always gonna be there. I just want, so for me, and when we have those types of issues that we have to deal with to really keep not just our community safe, but the entire county, and we're working with other fire chiefs and other fire agencies, those are the things that the public doesn't see, but that we should be kept abreast of, and making sure that those operations are strong. And so, I don't wanna go into detail right now, but I think if there's a way to make sure that our 911 system or dispatch is not compromised, I think that's our job. If there's a chance that could be compromised, we need to be there as a board to make sure that that lifeline is going to be there and robust. And that's the stuff that the public doesn't see and probably shouldn't see. I mean, they could probably, I don't want someone to say, oh my God, I called 911 and it doesn't work, or it's not there, and that is too late. And so if there's anything that we can do to make sure that that is intact and robust and accessible, and it works for obviously the residents, but also to make sure that, the communication piece for our emergency responders, they get all of that, and, there's no question, I mean, people should take that for granted. And if that is a problem, if the 911 system is compromised, we as a board need to make sure that it's not, and that we prevent that from happening. So that's the stuff that people they don't see, but we should see. And we should be working with our chief and our command staff, and we should be hearing about this from our first responders who are on the field every single day.
Good.
Good.
Director Bernstein.
Yeah, first of all, I think of a strategic plan as being a little bit more than 5 years. I mean, I believe a strategic plan, we should be talking about where do we want to be in 20 years, for example. But one of the problems I think we have is that who we are today is kind of a tradition-bound group of people that drive around in red trucks and periodically put out a fire. And I don't think that really relates to our mission. We're not a fire department. We're not a fire district, really. We do that every once in a while, but we hardly have any fires at all. We're much more of a medical services agency, medical response agency. And we don't really acknowledge that. We don't hire for that. We don't get equipment we get equipment like things to revive people and so forth, but we don't have vehicles that respond to that. And we don't have anybody talking about it, and we don't have anybody who really knows anything about it because they haven't been brought up in a medical services response agency, which is what I think we are. And so to me, the problem is we're talking to the wrong people about our future. If we're talking about the fire component, yes, that is a component. If we're talking about swift water rescue, yes, that's a small component, but a very, very small component. But the medical thing to me is huge, and we're not talking about that. And we're still expecting anybody who responds to that to be able to pull 100 pounds of hose up a, 12-story building or something. And I don't know that we need to keep doing that anymore. And that creates a certain workforce with a certain training. And so I feel like in a way, I think a danger here is that we talk to the people who want to keep doing what they've been doing for the last 75 or 100 years. There are things like it's alluded to, the ambulance part of what we do. I know it's another agency, and one of the hallmarks, say, of the fire services is that people are very polite to the people. But here we have an ambulance service that is not doing a good job. It's overcharging its customers. And that's something we should be addressing. I think the dispatch problem, yeah, in general, we do well once we get the call. But I've talked to zillions of people who said, God, I called and it rang and rang and rang and rang, and it took up almost 2 minutes before somebody answered. That's frustrating, but we don't even invite them to the community input because we didn't ask that question and there was no way we could send an invite to somebody who had to stay on the line 2 minutes before 911 was answered. So again, I think the danger is that we don't talk to the right people here. There's some missions that that relate to health and safety that we're not addressing. Lead poisoning is one, or lead contamination. Are we in charge of that? Well, why not? I mean, if we're there for health and safety, but if we're gonna parcel out, oh, that water people do that, or the city does that, or other people do that, then I think we've limited our view. Air pollution to some extent, we still haven't really in a major way dealt with either smoke detectors or carbon monoxide detectors. And those represent real dangers to people. We still have people that have bars on their windows in their homes, and we haven't really dealt with that because we think, well, we're not supposed to walk on their property, or I'm not sure what it is. I think the one major area that I've been looking for us to take a more significant role is disaster management. The people we have, at any one time, we might have 30 people on duty max, and we serve 100,000 people. There's no way 100,000 people can be served by 30. We haven't put out information about what do you call it, earthquake warning systems and so forth. And these are things that I think we should be talking about. How do we get that out there? I mean, should we use our firefighters to knock on doors or put door hangers there about, I mean, there's a million things that we could be talking about, but we're not talking about them because in general, the force we have is a response force. Something happens, they respond, but they don't really think ahead. And so I think we're losing opportunities. So I think the idea of having an operating plan is not what we should be doing. I think operations wise, I think we do a pretty good job. I just don't think we do the whole job, and we're not talking to the right people in terms of doing the whole job.
I can respect that thought.
I'd like to spin off of what Virginia said about dispatch.
So cover that, and then I'll, if Director Burnside,
I'm done.
then I'll
You
give
said
my.
you wanted to be
No, go,
last.
yeah,
You said you
well,
wanted to be last.
I don't wanna be at 10 o'clock tonight, so go ahead.
Well,
Go ahead and do your follow-up, and then I'll.
Huh?
Yeah, we do.
Go ahead.
Okay, when I was talking about support the mission, and, Virginia brought up dispatch. And, the current software program that they use, Visiterm, and the PSC CAD system, I'd be interested to see what the truth is, and if they're satisfied with that system. I've heard that, Visitorm is more for its law enforcement and the actual ambulance services than it is for fire. So since we are a fire district, is the county performing the services that we need in dispatch? And that would be one of those, as I spoke of before, goals and objectives that we'd have. And, not the effective stuff. Well, we've got this great stuff that works. No, I want to know the cognitive, communication issues, dead spots, communication towers, where they're located, are they effective, things like that. And is county OES providing the services to our district? And that's just, one of many, and I don't think they are. There's no way to measure when that call comes in and who filters it, and how long does it take from it to go from the dispatcher, and she's asking all these questions before she hits the button and dispatches a unit. That's kind of the unknown. If we were doing our own dispatch, we would know that, the chief would know that information. That would be something which Virginia brought up.
I mean, it's definitely.
It's something that we need. I mean, and Chuck brought up just now, when you dial 911, does it go to Vallejo Highway Patrol? And then they go, hold on, and we'll let you contact the local agency, and then they transfer you to Atherton, and the accident is on 101. So, those are huge issues that need to be addressed, especially, since we do have the jurisdictional authority on 280 and 101. So
You wanna make sure the plan addresses those things.
I want to make sure that they're operationally, as Chuck mentioned, that they're getting the proper operational support for the dispatch systems that the county's providing us. And then they want to raise our rates
Right, so
to pay
mine's,
more.
mine's more up in the air than, like, more, higher elevation, but I agree with you, Rob. My whole thing is, I wanna make sure it's functioning efficiently and effectively. And you're going into the details, which I think is
I'm
right,
going
'cause you
into
know-
baseline,
Yeah,
where basically,
Yeah.
when they key the mic, it works.
I just
are
don't wanna
those-
compromise.
What are the dead spots? What are the areas when a unit's dispatched or they go to linear accelerator? Can they properly communicate there? Is it the proper towering system? Does digital work better than analog relative to voice or, so huge amounts of questions. And, I even went so far to contact Visitorm. They're out of Mesa, Arizona, and spoke to 3 sales reps. And I don't want to speak to sales rep. My background is in tech ops when I was with the Justice Department. And I didn't get the answers I wanted. So I'm kind of sitting back, sitting on the JPA, the pre-medical JPA, because we're having issues with that, relative to
That's a
communications.
huge problem.
Yeah.
As you know.
And, well, that's a whole different avenue. Basically what we're talking about is communications, dispatch communications, which is the foundation of when our community needs help, that's where they're gonna go. And I don't think we're being sufficiently served.
Like I said, it's the lifeline, and I don't want it politicized. That part of public safety is so important, it should not be politicized, and I believe that's what's happening now. Not with us, but on a much bigger scale, as Rob is saying, by not being able to have these meetings that have been canceled routinely.
Easy question. Are we satisfied with the communication systems that we're being sold to by the county? Do our firefighters feel that it's operationally effective. It worked real well at the hail alarm fire that we had. No injuries, no deaths, contained fire, things all came together. But, you know, were we lucky? You know, I mean, that aspect, you know, I heard from some of the law enforcement people that were on the scene there that thing with the reporting, you know, from the time they got the call till the time they actually got the call out is an immeasurable type situation. So that's what I'm concerned about.
Yeah.
And I'm sure we have the sufficient amount of senior staff to solve those problems. Okay,
So,
thank you.
I'll take my side of feedback, or input, I guess.
It's
You know, it's not 11
It's
yet.
not 11 yet?
So I come from a corporate background more than an emergency services or public sector world. And when we think about kind of strategic plans in the corporate world, I think where they kind of get misguided is they overcompensate on all the things that can go wrong and how do you mitigate the risk to your quote business. The flip side of it is when I hear this discussion, one of my concerns is that we cover really three dimensions of the service. One is I think we provide incredibly good service today in both the medical field as well as the fire side of it. So it's kind of the who are we? I do agree with Chuck to some extent. You could almost revisit what we're called. Are we really a fire district or are we a fire and EMS agency? And I think of us, you know, more as a fire and EMS agency. And I think the public kind of knows that, but I don't know that they all know that, you know, it's the fire department showing up. They always expect an ambulance to show up. When I do emergency medical calls in my volunteer work, there's almost an explanation to them, the fire department's gonna come first. You know, they're gonna be there before the ambulance. That's going to be your first interaction with the response system that's coming in place. So a little bit of what I think is really important is we define the who are we today. And I think generally we provide incredibly good service within the agency. And I think that's a compliment. I think that's one of the reasons the feedback was probably light. I think if we're the disaster organization in that we didn't offer good services, you would have had plenty of feedback to that effect. But, you know, people just, I think in our community, because the district has provided good service for so long, we just come to expect good service.
Take it for
It's
granted.
the norm. Just, yeah, it's always done that. So I think making sure that we have a very clear definition of who are we in the strategic plan is important. The second piece of it is, okay, well, within that definition, where is it that we want to take the agents, you know, the district to be? And I tend to agree a little bit with a lot of what everybody has said, which is, I think there's more we can do out in the community from both marketing and talking and training and educating and serving the community beyond just responding. So it's kind of who do we want to be? Do we want to be a high quality education organization that educates people, educates the community on how to live safely? And that brings in things like smoke detector programs and carbon monoxide programs and CPR training and stop the bleed training. And it brings in a lot of different things to say, you know, kind of to take it to that next level to say, what do we also want to be known for? And I think today we're known for great response. And I think we serve the community better if we're known for all these other things we do as well. And some of them we're known for a little bit, like the task force. I think the FEMA task force, they say some community members see that. But I also know that there's recent Nextdoor posts when we deployed saying, well, why are we spending all that money outside the community? You know, that money should go into the community. No knowledge of anybody posting, of course, that says it doesn't come from our financials, it's reimbursed expenses. But there's even a step beyond that for that organization, as an example, which is what's the benefit to the local community of us being a sponsored agency of a FEMA team? And there's huge benefit of it on equipment, on training, on other things. So I think we can do a lot more around marketing what we do and communicating more additional things that can help people be safe beyond just being a great response organization. And then the third element so it's kind of the, who are we? What do we want to be? And then the third element is, what are the risks that we want to make sure we mitigate? And make sure that the risks never come to fruition. And that's where, in the corporate side of things, that's 90% of a strategic plan in most corporations, is how do I prevent, somebody from replacing me with and I come from the tech industry, with a new technology that makes me irrelevant. How do I prevent my organization from imploding from growth? Where I just don't have the right leadership, I don't have the right people, everything else. What are the external factors that can come into play that could dramatically affect us? And in my view, the strategic plan needs to take into account the risk side of things. Some of those risks for us, I believe, and for our reputation around response are things like traffic. And how are we working with the cities and the other government agencies to make sure that we have the best in class traffic corridors for fire response, fire and EMS response, both. Not just for us, but for ambulances, for police, for everybody. Because we also have this wonderful California housing element there, which is saying, oh, let's put a bunch of high density stuff all over the community too, with no thought process for what that's going to do to the traffic patterns and the gridlock. Some of the places they're proposing is places we already have gridlock. So now we're gonna add 3,000 more housing units and think it's gonna get better.
Double down.
Yeah, we're gonna double down on the housing, you just won't be able to get to the housing. But so I do think there are a number of things that the strategic plan should cover from a risk mitigation perspective. I think the dispatch services is one of them. I think the ambulance services is another one. I think just traffic and the things that could affect us from a response perspective. I think we should always, in the back of our strategic plan, know what our core services are, so that we don't take for granted the idea that says, today we're well funded, and we've been well funded for a number of years, but what happens if the housing market implodes here? And what happens if, there's a major decline in the real estate market, which we're a tax revenue based organization. So if there's a dramatic, decline in the housing market, everyone applies for reappraisals on their houses. You don't have to sell it to get it reappraised and get a lower tax basis. Our revenues decline. What happens then if we had a really significant, and we could look and say, well, it's never happened here. And in a way, it hasn't really ever happened here, not to the scope of what happened in some of the areas outside of Sacramento or others during the credit crisis, but it definitely could happen. And so I think the strategic plan needs to bring into play what are the extraneous risk factors that would affect the future of the fire district and how we operate and how we think about the services we provide. And it's all, to me, it's all interrelated.
Yeah.
Because if you're predominantly a response organization that says, really the strategic plan should say, we prioritize fire and EMS response over everything else. Which I think, safely speaking, I think we do.
Yeah.
I think we would sacrifice everything else we do if we were having trouble trying to just get individuals to the proper services to the proper emergency. We would redefine lots of processes, we'd throw away lots of things. But I think we can do a better job making sure that we have those documented in a strategic plan and that we have risk mitigation built into it. And I think you heard a flavor of some of those. To me, I don't know that we particularly have a dispatch problem today. I think we have risk of a dispatch problem in the future, and partly just because it's out of our control. We're dependent on somebody else to do their job. What happens if they don't?
Right.
That's the ultimate risk for the fire service. Same thing with the ambulance service. There's a crumbling supply of paramedics in California, and it's like, okay, well, how should we be thinking about the next 5 years if we assume the ambulance companies continue to have major staffing problems to properly staff their ambulances? How would that risk redefine our basic services? So that's kind of how I think about it, is in those three dimensions of kind of who are we, what else could we be doing and we should be doing, and then what are the risk mitigations that we should be taking, the risk areas we're trying to cover.
Those are phenomenal. Go ahead. Yes.
I didn't bring up ambulance, but I have the same concerns as everyone else. It's mainly because the contract for that is, and we still have years left on that, but I think we need to start planning for that. We need to start asking questions to make sure that, you know, it's robust and it's affordable, accessible. I mean, it's not gonna be perfect, but I don't wanna risk that, and I don't know, I think we may be out of time for dispatch, but I don't know for sure. And not, and what I mean out of time, I just don't, because we have contracts, right, and I don't know where we are with the contracts for 911, but I know that ambulance is a little further out, but that doesn't mean we shouldn't start planning. And like everyone else here has said, that service, I view that as, especially 911, the 911 service is a lifeline. And like I said, the public should just be able to take that for granted, and we need to be able to make sure that that's a robust system, whatever system we use operationally, right? It just,
Yeah,
and it
our,
can be very
our,
politicized too.
our strategic plan though should not assume that there's an ambulance contract and
That's right.
that ambulance contract is a showstopper from us doing something different.
No, I know.
Because my guess is if we really drill down and spend the time to read the contracts, that they're probably in breach of their contracts.
Well, my point
Because
is.
it's impossible to believe they couldn't be in breach of their contracts. They have response time goals, there's so many measures and everything else that are typically built in those. I've never looked at it, so I
Well, my
can't speak
whole
to it as a
point-
lawyer or as a business guy even,
Yeah.
but it just, there's very few contracts under which somebody's not in some form of breach of the agreement that allows you an opening to say, I wanna do something different. And
Right.
but it's more of the fundamental risk to me. It's about the risk mitigation that says, you know, right now, we have a dependency on dispatch, we have a dependency on an ambulance service of which we don't control.
Right,
Yeah, what we do control is that we put a paramedic on scene. What we don't control is that paramedic may end up stuck there with that patient for 30 minutes longer than they should be.
Out
Because-
of our district.
Because the ambulance hasn't shown up yet. Well, it could be right in our district, it could be a walk up to station one. And they could be sitting there with a patient for 45 minutes waiting for an ambulance at station one. It doesn't
Right,
matter the
right.
location. What matters is that there's a limited number of resources available in the community. And yes, they have mutual aid, and yes, they, you know, do rolling people from other areas. We've had incidents in the county where ambulances came from Alameda and Contra Costa and other places. But I'm just talking the basics of making sure that our strategic plan looks at things that are key dependencies for things that we believe we do really well, that could be immediately degraded by somebody else falling down.
right.
Yeah, no fault of ours, but all of a sudden the community looks and goes, you know, EMS response time in Menlo Park Fire Protection District sucks.
Right.
It's just awful.
And I think.
And they don't different, the community members,
They
I
don't-
mean,
they don't-
I understand that they
When you
don't.
dial 911, you think you're talking to the firefighter.
You don't even know who you're talking to, you're just saying, hey, I got a medical emergency, the cavalry's coming. They don't know who does which part,
Sure.
they don't know what role law enforcement plays in it. They don't know what part an air ambulance plays into it if you're in the more remote areas of the county. They don't know any of that. They just know, I dial these 3 digits and help comes.
Right.
But
And
we're
that-
the,
they should expect
my
that.
point is that we're the deliverer of a service of which we don't control all the components. And as much as we put great emphasis on how good of a job we do, that's only as good as the related
Everyone
service
else.
that we're getting from others.
That's
I
right.
think you'll be pleased at the dialogue that's been going on this week related to what you're describing. Because there's not only the impact of the ambulance or the 911, that there's the impact of the planning going on in the community, the traffic,
Yeah.
There's definitely dialogue built into what they've already discussed about with saying that if this happens, what's the impact to us? And how do we prepare for that? You know, if traffic gets worse, how do we prepare for that? If these other projects get built, how do we manage a taller building? If those issues, they are definitely, I think, on track with those 3 areas that you're you're identifying.
Yeah, they just have to be on track, just, and I think, I know you heard it, I just want to make sure it's emphasized, on track for our portion of it. But the things that affect
That.
what we do, our dependencies have to also be on track on
And,
these things.
and then within the scope that you wanna operate, how do they make sure life is better for the community in the scope of service delivered by the fire district?
Right.
And if you can be in scope and do that, and then the things that are outside of that, how do you influence those to either minimize the impact or improve the quality of life for the resident?
Yeah, I just think when you talk a 5-year plan though, I think it's important to say, as part of the 5-year plan, to eliminate some of those risk factors, eliminate those dependencies.
But I think the important part, which is that we're talking about, you made on as well, between the community and the fire district. They're somehow both gonna have to be on the same page in order to achieve those objectives. I've been sort of community and people have a visual recognition of the fire district, but they don't quite understand all of the scope of the issues that we're talking about, to the point, they understand it to the point of where, how it may impact the community. For a simple thing of putting roundabouts all over the community. I mean, how does that impact the fire district? Putting these speed bumps that's, almost 12 inches high, how does that impact the fire district? Understanding the relationships between the two is so important, and somehow we have to figure that out.
You wanna make sure the plan has that built in.
Yeah, well, the point on that is they don't know if I call 911 for a medical call, it doesn't matter if the fire department could be there in 20 seconds and start servicing it, if the ambulance takes 20 minutes. Because my view of the response is gonna be, that really sucked. I called 911, it was a half hour before they got me into the buggy to take me to Stanford.
And people don't understand that
They don't
relationship.
have a clue,
They don't
and they shouldn't have
And they
to,
shouldn't have.
but they shouldn't have to.
Well, they shouldn't
But
have to, but
that's what I'm trying to
But
touch
it's
on.
community.
Right.
But those are the dependencies associated with what we do
Yes,
that I believe we have to cover in our strategic plan.
right, I agree.
Chuck,
I just want to
I wanna make sure that the guy at the end of the road doesn't get it.
I just want to be sure that we get in here also. What should be the public posture, say, of the fire district? Again, I think we care about decorum and being civil and things like that. But frankly, some of these things involve big money. I'm talking about developers, I'm talking about the ambulance company. And I think some of that big money is what influenced the legislature to do what it did. And should we be talking about that or should we not be? And I'm not gonna address it here, I'm just saying that normally I try to address it, but it's normally not what public bodies wanna talk about because it's dirty. And can we talk about dirty things or not?
Right. So a little piece of the process that I think makes this style of work good is that you have a good staff that's gonna take these and make sure they're incorporated, right? You're gonna, what gets presented to you, if you see a gap, you're gonna say, I wanna make sure there's an action item on X, right? And that'll be plopped in there in a manner that works. But the way this moves forward is through the budget process, you get to determine which action items are gonna be funded or not funded, which efforts are gonna be funded or not funded, right? So every year, that formal budget process gets happen, and then you get updates on the progress of what you said you wanna happen. So when you say, yep, we're comfortable with these action items moving forward underneath those initiatives, you've asked for this much funding, we're gonna give you funding to do that. There's an outcome statement that you end up either modifying a little bit or adopting the way it sits. The accountability comes back to you on the speed and process where this works. So it's a very much a living document that runs through the budget process. A year or two in, you have some new impact, some surprise, some issue. You get to feed that back into the plan and make those adjustments. but it allows for a dialogue about what the priorities are, what the efforts are, where you want to spend time on prior to the full development of the budget. So when the budget comes, it's really more of a refinement of what you've already talked about.
But
Well,
everything's,
we have to be
everything's
on the
not,
same page as the staff too. I mean,
well, I'm just,
You do, you would be.
but everything's not a budget issue though. Some of this is a
But-
policy issue too.
Yeah.
Some of
That's
it's
what I was
policy
gonna
that
say.
becomes you, some of it's policy or practice that becomes the district. Some of it may not be direct financial expenditures, but it's time.
Mhm.
It's time and energy, which works, the budget document tends to work the best way so that you can say, here's what is expected of the district and communicating to the public. The budget document often works really, really well at putting clarity on what's the purpose, what's the driving mission this year.
Well, I
From
would
this
also say
process.
what potentially is a future, a vision, like what do we want, like Gary said, if we look at the contract and the potential breaches, what are the opportunities that we have
Right.
to create something or put a policy around, you know, we don't want X, Y, and Z, or we want X, Y, A, B, C, or whatever it is, right? That is something that the board, and I think Chuck is trying to get to some of that too, that's what, and I agree with you on that, like, we need to actually set some vision too, right? That is not necessarily operational, but the operations can actually fit into the vision. Then we can sit there and figure out how to fund whatever it is, or, you know, deal with, I don't know, this dispatch and ambulance, or whatever it is.
Can I ask a question? Just sorry, let me ask one question real quick. Is there a place for, in your strategic plan methodology, for things that are longer range?
Absolutely.
Because to Chuck's point, everything doesn't fit in a 5-year
Five-year
window.
plan.
And
Because as an example, I'll take the ambulance thing as an example.
Right.
If you ask me to define what the district should look like, I think it's unrealistic in a 5-year window to say that we'd be providing our own ambulance service. But I think establishing a goal that says a decade from now, that says the district is a full-fledged fire and EMS agency, and we do soup to nuts fire and EMS response. I think that's reasonable in a 10-year window.
So we're focused in on the 5-year for action items and initiatives, right? But we have a component that we call long-term opportunities and challenges that really have the opportunity to identify those issues that you're concerned with and maybe make a few statements of things that you want to refine in the future. That's where that type of thing comes in. So if you decide that we want to move in this direction, you capture it, but you don't necessarily flesh it out yet because there's too many variables to get into specifics. But you want to capture it to put it on the radar for yourself.
Correct.
That
For the
is where that
future.
fits. But it's not going to be as specific as what's in that shorter term plan. So it's not necessarily in the vein, you didn't ask for a 20-year master plan. You asked for a 5-year strategic plan, right? But we layer in a chance to identify that type of issue.
Yeah, I don't know how you can't layer those things
You
in
have to.
because
You have to capture.
because that's part of who we wanna be.
And then
Aspect of
and
it.
it could even be that in year 3, an opportunity hits and you already pretty much stated where you wanna be, and you sweep it into the existing plan, you can do that. You can also decide that the piece that's presented in here, you can decide, I wanna add one more initiative that's really a board level initiative and a couple of action items for that.
Mhm.
It is the broader part. The staff is starting with bringing you the stuff that relates to the service. You hit it really well, the service today, what can be done tomorrow, and what's gonna impact our ability to continue meeting what the adopted mission is and vision for the district. And then if you, as a board level, want to adopt some additional components that are bigger picture, higher policy level, there's nothing that stops you.
Well, some of those things may actually change what the mission is too. Because the mission today may not be the mission the board wants.
Or
for the
20
community.
years from now.
Rob, I cut off
No,
Rob.
that's okay, I'm good. I'm good.
You're good.
How is just to go to this ambulance thing? Is it part of a 3 to 5 year plan for us to do our own transports?
I don't think none of that is defined yet because you haven't adopted a plan. The conversation may be there, but you haven't adopted a plan yet. This is just in draft
Well,
starter.
it needs to be, because we had one company bid for a contract. So we're kind of stuck with the one company, okay? We have a situation where they are the major FEMA response for a natural disaster. So they're supposed to supply, I think, between 125 and 150 ambulances. Okay, so, you know, we have a certain amount here that are contractual, but is that gonna affect us here relative, if they're dispatching in North Carolina, South Carolina, or wherever, okay? So I think there should be, well, it gets complicated too for us in this county is because the firefighters and the paramedics are represented by the same union. So it's kind of like union, do we want to get to a point where we dispatch or transport our own people, as some of the other fire agencies do, like Palo Alto, South San Francisco? Woodside is Woodside still?
They're EMR.
They were a contract with AMR, and I will share with you interesting. Is it feasible in the next 3 to 5 years? Probably not, because there's still an AMR contract.
I think what,
I think, yeah, I think it could be in the 10-year plan, ironically or not so. Dan's firm, AB Triton, is actually doing a separate branch that specializes in EMS studies, is doing an EMS study for the county fire chiefs to value the system, to look at some options. There's a litany of legal issues involved with us as a fire district and being able to have transport rights. You know, there's lawsuits that go across the state of California related to local governments trying to slide in and gain transport rights via RFP or just by saying, there's even, I was at a fire chiefs conference last week, they were talking about some kind of little loophole where it's possible that fire districts may have some legal standing to be able to exercise these rights. But it should be, you know, on the longer horizon. If that's something the board is interested in, we can start going down and exploring that. There'll be certainly some expenses involved in getting some legal opinions and potentially a legal fight, but they might be worthwhile.
well, like Virginia wrote about the dispatch service. No, there's talk where they want to move those services to the city of San Mateo, the police department, to dispatch the ambulance services and to take away the OES stuff, you know, from them. And so, you know, it's not like, oh, it's a problem that's gonna go away. It's a problem that's gonna keep rising. Now, as the chief said, we have a 4-year contract, I think they're with it.
AMR, and it's through the county, and
Yeah, so we don't even have control over that because it is,
Well, I mean, that's the
Contractual.
point though. Can we have control over that? I don't know. That's what Gary's
But
saying.
that gets into the definition,
Right.
kind of what do we
What do
want
we-
our agency to
To
be?
look like.
And then it's, the board is incumbent, and I think you're correct, it comes back to budget and everything else, there would be expenses involved, there'd be studies involved, there'd be legal advice, there'd be other things, but if the board, as a representative for a community, says, hey, this is what we think is best for the community, I think we're on relatively solid ground to build it into our plan and say, how do we want to start budgeting dollars to start addressing that potential?
and it goes back to the
We
organization.
may not be able to do it, but it's,
And it goes back to the organization. Are they satisfied with the response they get from AMR?
Yeah, let's-
Relative to their calls for operational
let's
service?
give Dan a chance
Part
to
of-
respond to
Well, I
the
think-
last 10 or 15 minutes of
I don't-
one-side dialogue, and then
I'll
we'll
get-
get
I'll
ready
get
to chat.
very Politically wise though, what, I don't wanna put words in your mouth, but what you really want is the best level of service possible for your community. Correct. Right?
That's always the
You
case.
want-
Today and tomorrow.
Today and tomorrow, right?
Always.
And you want the best medical care, all the things that you have a scope of responsibility for, you want the best care for that community. In some ways, you're better positioned to make a long-term statement of ensuring we have the very best service, both in fire, emergency medical transport, care, et cetera, right? Without necessarily not without necessarily saying, we wanna run the ambulance.
Correct.
Right.
Without
There's a-
what
there-
necessarily-
Yeah, because there are other
Necessarily
things that
saying-
can be done.
Cause what you may decide is you can't demonstrate to me as a vendor that you can do this as good as we can. Our goal is really simple. We want the best possible service in dispatch. We want the best possible service in medical transport. And what that looks like, you're gonna continue to explore and find out. Because if the dispatch center, for instance, can share with you that Versaterm's doing a good job, the performance is well, the center is reinforcing, the call answer time is good, you're gonna be happy if you can be proven that it's good.
Are they happy though?
Well, you're gonna be happy.
Your foundation or?
The metrics are demonstrating they're good, you're gonna say, okay, then we're getting good service from the community to the community. But if they're not happy, you want something to be done about
Yeah, service is
Right.
time and quality both. Yeah,
That's
just to
right.
be clear, because
That's right.
sometimes it's really easy to measure time, it's very difficult to measure quality.
it.
But we wanna make, I think it's important that the plan
Right.
encompass time and quality.
Yes.
Let's go over to Chuck.
Any time, man.
I just wanted to say something about the budget, because you brought up an interesting point, and I think one way we're very different than municipal agencies is our budget has absolutely nothing to do ever with any goals or mission statements or anything like that. There'll be some little thing, in there about what this group does, but we budget down to how much rope we're using and just silly things like that. There are no goals in there at all.
Okay.
And I think there should be a linkage, so I hope you'll address that.
Yeah.
But I have long felt that it was intentional that the fire professionals didn't want the board messing in their business, so they didn't put goals there. And so there's
Okay.
absolutely zero accountability from saying, we spent the money, did we get what we were looking for? That never comes up. It's never discussed, it's never presented.
Okay, well, that's an issue we can talk about. My experience has been that the budget document actually tells the full story of service delivery, accountability, goals, et cetera. That becomes a really productive document when you tie it to that. So that a person could look at that and understand, this is what I'm getting for my money.
Right.
As opposed to a spreadsheet of expenditures. And we can talk about that, and if that's a desire for you, that is something that you as a collective group need to say, this is what we want.
For me, the budget is always the number one thing in terms of what you will financially help you so that we can do all these things. And
It's just numbers.
No, I know, but I mean, we were at one point, I've seen our budget go from 31-ish to 33 million to where we are today, which is more than triple, right? Because of growth in property taxes and all that. And Gary's right that it's possible that things could change, and actually things, there was a reassessment at one point where we were gonna possibly lose the tax revenues from like Genentech, that happened in one, I can't remember what year that was, but the point is that we have to be prepared for that financially too, right, for these potential shortfalls or whatever. And I think the public expects us to be that way,
Sure.
and that may not necessarily always be in sync with staff, right? But I think in general it will be, because we know that we represent the community. And so in order for us to be able to deliver the services and the quality of the services and all of that, we have to be financially healthy. To me, that's always the number one priority. It's gotta be. Otherwise, we're gonna go down this hole where we won't have money if we're spending it willy-nilly, and then we can't provide the best delivery of services.
Okay, good. This has been very helpful. I think it'll be really good. We'll capture this. Tomorrow we talk, we meet again. But again, this is like a process, and the process comes to you for the final approval to make sure it meets what you just described are your intents. And the other part that's important is you obviously are gonna end up acting collectively, so you're as a group gonna decide and may even have disagreements amongst yourself about what we're
That
buying
never
should
happens here.
look like. And, the counsel I've had for the staff is, that's part of the process. You know, that collective dialogue and that final decision on the collective decision on where the board goes. Don't worry about, different individual viewpoints until it becomes a collective, and follow that guy. Right? That it becomes a really, that is the value of this discussion, you know, this dialogue, this cross-section of everything, makes it a little muddy until it becomes clean. And they were comfortable in the last few days being in the mud, trying to figure out the right thing to do until they could find that clarity. And we've all been there, right? When you did that, when you're trying to identify that, you're swimming in it for a while until all of a sudden you find, well, this really actually achieves what everybody seems to be talking about. That's hard work, and they've been doing that. You have a very good group of people that are thinking way beyond today's service model. They're thinking way beyond just operation. They're actually really concerned about making sure that they are presenting you with a project that is focused on sustainability, is focused on truly meeting the needs of the community, truly meeting everything, not just what's happening at one of the stations today. They're a good, broad thinking group. I think you'll be pleased with what the first draft is that gets brought to you. Does that make sense? I think.
It does to me, because I mean, they're immersed in it 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Whether they're on duty or not, they're thinking about what they do for a living. We parachute in on a periodic basis and assess how are things going, everything else, but we don't live it every day.
But it's a
We're not
partnership.
doing the service.
But
It's a
together,
partnership.
But
you end up with
it
a
is.
phenomenal product
Yeah, great.
when it's a partnership, and you have an organization that is thinking very much similarly to what's important to you. But you will bring the tools to that table that helps connect all those dots to make sure it's the very best thing for this coming period.
I've been on boards that just weren't interested in the true strategic planning. You know, they thought they were there just to manage the budget and manage day-to-day process. And ignored what to me was really part of the board responsibility. I think what you're hearing from this board is this is a board that is concerned about some of these bigger topics. And I think what I hear the board trying to get across is we want to make sure those are major components of the plan, is that bigger picture. Because it's relatively easy to do these operational budgets, put on the operational budgets and put them through. We know the staffing, we know the facilities requirements, we know the cost of engines. We've been through all those processes, building by building, engine by engine, labor contract by labor contract, organization by organization to build out a budget. But the question becomes today, what are the disconnects between what we do and what the community really, in the community, I think the scary part when I get in, and I've been a hands-on person in EMS as well. It still am today, but it's when you're doing it, it's actually scary in a way how little people know about this organization, about this organization that they're so highly dependent on for their life in a strange way. They just all they really know is they dial this number and something happens. But it's like in everything else in their life, most people are much more proactive about understanding how things come together that affect their life.
Understood.
Yeah, they probably know more about the plumber and the plumbing service that comes out to fix their broken plumbing than they do about the fire agency and the ambulance service and the dispatch process. It comes out, it comes out to save their life. It's kind of a bizarre thing, but I think what you're hearing is this board is actually, we actually care about the mechanics and the pieces that make up the bigger picture. Even though we recognize today we only control one piece of the deliverable, but the community, and this goes back to your earlier comment, I think the community expects us as a board to be watching out for their best interests, and their best interest is bigger than just what we do.
Right.
Chuck?
I was curious to know, one of the things that I've always wanted us to take a look at is the firefighter shifts. And I think what we're doing now, I think is a more costly way of doing it, and we know that it's actually not good for firefighter health and things like that. Are they taking a look at all at, a different shift structure for part or all of the services we offer?
They're looking at options for enhanced service delivery to the community that could end up showing, different options, it could end up showing that. It's just like we're talking about as far as you trying to identify, like, what's the best, we wanna make sure the best quality is happening here. The plan isn't solving the problem, the plan is saying, we see this as a gap that needs to be addressed and assessed, right? So this plan, your previous plan was a good plan, but it was very tactical. It was very focused on some very specific things. This plan is saying, let's not worry and incorporate into the strategic plan, things that are going fine. The processes are solving, they're working through. Let's talk about where we see the potential gaps, the potential risks, the issues that are coming. And let's focus on those. One of those things is, how do we enhance what we're doing for the community to make it better? That's an item that's in there that could launch into a lot of different options for an alternative type response or process. But I'm trying to stop them from solving these things in the meeting, or I'll never get through giving them a plan.
Is it possible that they'll bring to us options, I mean, it's
I
alternatives?
think it starts with the saying, yes, that's an action item we wanna see happen. And then the dialogue that comes from that is gonna have to bring in issues that maybe are uncomfortable for employees, but the right thing for the community. I'm hearing that dialogue for people today. Well, this may not be good for me, but it's probably good for the community. You've got a really good group of people that are thinking broader than maybe you think. I really do. And I think that, remember though, that these action items are designed to put a target with an outcome. And then there's gonna be a group come together to work on it and keep refining it until it's ready. Then it can get presented to the budget process for you then to review. By that time, it becomes pretty focused in the right space. And we're trying to keep the list pretty short so that the things that get done are the most important things right now to get done, right, over the next several years. A lot of those action items are gonna be done in the next few years, because that's the way we are, right? We think we can get it all done early, but the initiatives and the outcomes last for the time, and they'll create more action items as they start identifying more issues that relate to that initiative. But it's a process, and I think
When do you expect this to come to us?
I think that, you'll have something probably by the end of the year that, or before, potentially, that the chief has a chance to prepare something that feels like they've met your expectations and put it in front of you. But clearly before you start adopting budgets.
Well, before the end of the year is next meeting, next month. I'm not,
Okay.
I mean, is that realistic? Are we gonna see some stuff on the November agenda?
December, possibly.
Well, that's not before.
If you're in December or January, you're in line with preparation for your budget.
I don't, by the way, I don't question the quality of our team ever. I work too closely with a lot of them for too long to question that. I also never really questioned their intent as to what they're trying to do. I think what happens though, sometimes in organizations is you create artificial barriers of things that you think are off the table when you're thinking about things.
Sure.
And so if I'm and I'll give you an example, if I'm a paramedic or a fire captain and I've been responding to these medical calls and I'm just so used to day in and day out, I wait for an ambulance. And on my critical calls, I get back on and go, what's the ETA, what's the ETA, what's the ETA? But I'm just so accustomed to, it's out of my control.
Right.
You just, at some point you accept it and go, all I can do is get on the radio and ask for an ETA and ask for them to get here quicker. Reprioritize, do something.
Yeah.
Bail me out. There's not much more I can do here until they show up. This is a transport issue. It's not an on-site, on-scene issue.
Yeah.
And I think what happens is if if those, and I think there's always issues in every organization that they kind of give up or they stop thinking about the solution because it's the way it's been for so long. And I think we have a few of those kinds of issues in our fire district. And I think there's an opportunity if we do a really good strategic plan that has that futuristic component, that it says, let's make sure we capture some of those things and make sure that those get prioritized, because some of those are board issues. And some of those are things that will never change if the board doesn't start really kind of putting some pressure on some of those issues, because it's easy for us just to accept it too, in a strange way. I mean, we can all sit around and complain about it, that we have no problem doing that. But to actually say, no, we're gonna mobilize,
Get something.
the power of the board to start influencing a path to the future that says we're gonna do something different. And so I don't think there's any question about their intent, their quality, or anything else. It's just, I wanna make sure that in the course of doing a strategic plan, that we really capture some of the things that they've accepted as just the way business happens in San Mateo County.
And I think that'll be a really healthy experience for them to realize that, right? As they start thinking more critically, as they start looking at options, they start removing these imaginary handcuffs about what they can do. And it doesn't mean that they might identify a problem and you might end up still deciding that there's nothing we can do about that.
Maybe.
But you may decide, let's go ahead and look at that, which opens up a whole other flood of dialogue. That's the shared.
Well, there's also the part of it too that says we may not be able to do anything about the ambulance service, but there's something we could do different in our EMS response
Right.
that mitigates some of the pain and suffering that occurs because of the ambulance delay.
Yeah.
Yeah, is there another type of, we have, critical care nurses that can respond out on calls like that help, assist the paramedic in a next level of care for the delay of the ambulance. I'm not saying we should go do that, I'm just,
No, but
I
you wanna
think-
know, the potential of the impact, positive, negative, and then what the cost is.
what the options are.
You wanna know.
There's a variety of,
I-
almost everything we've discussed here, we could probably sit around and come up with 50 options
Yeah.
for everything. But to me, that it's really important that the strategic plan clearly identify these challenges and not be too specific about, it has to be solved this way.
Right,
Perfect.
that's
That's
the
exactly-
creative opportunity.
That's exactly the piece, and you're giving strategic and policy level direction to your staff to go work on these issues, and you're authorizing them to, yes, we do wanna know an answer to that, and go work on that, and bring it back to us when you're ready. And those are really productive pieces of this plan, and as they experience the ability to do that, they start thinking even better critically in the future, they start thinking about options and that whole balance. If they've never been asked to do that, you can't expect the first pass to be as good as the second pass.
It's the same way in the corporate world, there's organizations that have been told what to do for so long.
Yeah.
You bring a new leader and says, well, how would you solve it? And they've
Yeah.
lost their ability to even think or contribute on
We've
that.
always done it that way.
It's like, well, no, it's not that we've always done that, we've always been told that's how we're gonna do it. So we gave up on thinking about the 50 other ways we could. And we have a nice opportunity here, I think, with a new chief, relatively new chief, I can't say new chief anymore. Been here more than the honeymoon period. But, we have a good mixture of new leadership in the mix here to really rethink some of these things, so appreciate it. Any other board comments?
Well, we're gonna get a list of the people that participated.
Yeah.
And then we're gonna get the sample survey that was sent out.
But when is the next time we're gonna meet to discuss this?
We don't have a specific time, it would be at the board meeting that we actually present the first, I'll call it a draft, because it will be subject to input, but probably the December meeting.
We may
December?
discuss. Yeah, December, so as an idea, I think you should keep open the idea of another special meeting
Yeah.
to discuss it, cause I worry that in the course of a regular board meeting, we give it the bum rush. If we have,
Right.
we
Rather than focus
have
on-
15 things we have to approve and motion through and debate. And then we just don't
Yeah, we could
have
be
the
here for
quality
days.
time. But I mean, I think the value of this discussion was a singular topic, and a focus on one thing,
Yeah.
which was the strategic plan. I think it just makes it a more productive dialogue, so you might consider that. I'm assuming the rest of the board would be amenable to another special session for something this important.
It would be helpful if we could get it, the draft in advance, so we could actually read it.
Yep. Like, what are the
And your
goals and
feedback.
objectives for the next 5 years that you've agreed upon? So we can look at it and then we can have, saying that's good, that's great. that's, or
Yeah,
why?
I mean, in a funny way, I think this process we just ran was good, not having it. Because what we've done is we've surfaced some of the topics that the board has clearly some emotion about. That if you're just reading it, you start editing and modifying what's there, you don't think about what you really want in it. So in a way, I kind of appreciate that this approach as well.
I think it's important for you to understand the
Thanks
process
for
involved.
listening to us.
But I think
That's
it's
very
good to
helpful.
see what's been captured too,
Yes.
right? Because sometimes the intent is not necessarily on the paper.
Yeah, or it doesn't become clear.
Right.
I'm just curious, are you expecting to take back comments from here to that group?
Yes, tomorrow morning, we're gonna start out by talking about what was talked about here tonight on expectations. That was the intent of why we wanted to hold a meeting before we were done with the group. And I do think, like I mentioned, I think a generous portion of what we talked about is already in the conversation. And I think there are probably a couple other things that we'll make sure that they think about and putting in. And we haven't even hit the discussion of the bullets yet on long-term considerations that potentially are outside of the 5-year window.
I think you've heard almost all of the hot button issues, and that's good. And
There's really not that many.
there aren't that many, less than 10, I mean, but
Yeah, but I mean,
I think
the
it's
hot
start
button issues are really important. Yeah, but the hot button issues are really important.
Yeah,
Are really, I mean, I would, 10 or 2 or whatever, to me, these are the most important issues.
they also have ramifications. So for example,
Right.
talking about the shifts
Yeah,
relates to the composition of our workforce and
Yeah.
things like that in terms of diversity.
okay.
Okay,
Thank you.
anybody have anything else? Okay, I think on that, we can adjourn to our next regularly scheduled meeting of November 19th, 2024.
At 8:38, Michelle. Here's the
I
And there's